The undervalued sibling often grows up not in open conflict, but in quiet absence. They are present in the family system, yet psychologically overlooked. Attention flows toward the louder child, the more demanding one, or the one who best fulfills the parent's unconscious expectations. Nothing cruel may be spoken, and yet something essential is missing: recognition. Over time, the child learns that being unnoticed is safer than being authentic. They speak less, ask for less, and slowly shrink their inner world to fit the space they are given. From a psychological perspective, this is not a small wound. When a child's inner experiences are not mirrored, the psyche draws a dangerous conclusion: if no one sees me, perhaps there is nothing worth seeing. Carl Jung observed that what is not made conscious does not disappear. It becomes internalized. The feeling of invisibility turns inward and solidifies into a core belief, shaping identity, confidence, and self-worth. So the undervalued sibling becomes emotionally self-reliant too early, learning to survive without support, while secretly longing to be chosen. And here is the truth worth reflecting on. Being unseen in childhood is not evidence of insignificance. It is often the birthplace of unrecognized depth. When a child grows up in the shadow of another, comparison becomes the language through which they learn who they are. Sometimes it is explicit: grades, achievements, behavior, and sometimes it is unspoken, conveyed through tone, attention, or disappointment. The psyche does not need words to understand hierarchy. It feels it. And over time, repeated comparison gives rise to what Jung described as the inferiority complex, not as a flaw, but as a psychological response to persistent devaluation. The child does not simply think, "I am less." They become less in their own inner narrative. Their strengths feel accidental, their desires feel excessive, and confidence feels like arrogance. This complex operates quietly, shaping decisions long before conscious choice appears. It pushes the individual either to overcompensate through relentless striving or to withdraw altogether, convinced that effort will never be enough. Philosophically, this is the tragedy of misplaced value. Worth becomes something external, something granted rather than inherent. Yet the very awareness of inferiority is also evidence of a reflective mind, one capable of depth and self-observation. The task is not to defeat the complex, but to see it clearly, because what is seen can be transformed, and what is understood no longer controls us. As the inferiority complex takes root, it rarely remains passive. It demands expression, and it often does so in extremes. Many undervalued siblings become relentless achievers, driven not by joy, but by the hope that success will finally earn them visibility. Every accomplishment becomes a question rather than a celebration. This enough now? Others move in the opposite direction, unconsciously sabotaging their own progress. Opportunities are delayed, talents are hidden, and goals are abandoned just before fulfillment, because deep down, success feels unfamiliar and unsafe. Jung understood this as compensation. The psyche seeks balance, but when worth is conditional, both ambition and avoidance serve the same unconscious belief: I must earn the right to exist. Overachievement and self-sabotage are not opposites. They are twin responses to the same wound. One says, if I become exceptional, I will be loved. The other says, if I fail first, rejection will hurt less. Philosophically, this reveals a profound misunderstanding of value. When identity is built on performance, the self becomes fragile, always one failure away from collapse. Real transformation begins when effort is no longer used to justify existence, but to express it. You are not here to prove your worth. You are here to embody it. When a child learns that expressing needs leads to dismissal, they begin to adapt in a subtle but costly way. The undervalued sibling often becomes emotionally efficient, speaking only when necessary, feeling only what can be managed. They sense early on that strong emotions disrupt the fragile balance of attention in the family, so they turn inward. Over time, this self-suppression is mistaken for maturity, even praised as independence, while the inner life grows increasingly unseen. Jung spoke of the shadow as the part of the psyche that is pushed out of awareness, not because it is dark, but because it was unwelcome. For the undervalued sibling, the shadow often holds anger, longing, and grief, perfectly human emotions that had no safe place to land. These feelings do not disappear. They surface later as chronic exhaustion, emotional numbness, or the quiet sense of being disconnected from one's own life. Philosophically, self-suppression creates a split between who one is and who one is allowed to be. Energy is spent maintaining this divide, leaving little room for vitality or authenticity. Healing begins when emotions are no longer treated as liabilities, but as signals. If you listen to what you once silenced, you reclaim not just your feelings, but your aliveness. What remains unresolved in childhood rarely stays there. It follows us quietly into adulthood, shaping the relationships we choose and the roles we accept. The undervalued sibling often finds themselves in familiar positions, being overlooked at work, emotionally sidelined in partnerships, or valued mainly for what they provide rather than who they are. This is not coincidence, it is psychological continuity. The psyche is drawn to what feels known, even when what is known is painful. Jung observed that we do not repeat the past because we want to suffer, but because the unconscious seeks completion. The adult hopes, without realizing it, that this time the ending will be different. That recognition will finally come. Yet without awareness, the pattern repeats. Boundaries remain weak, needs go unspoken, and self-abandonment is mistaken for loyalty or love. Philosophically, this reveals a profound truth. Familiarity is not the same as safety. When we confuse endurance with virtue, we remain trapped in old stories. Growth begins the moment we recognize that being chosen by others is less important than choosing ourselves. When you interrupt the pattern consciously, you reclaim authorship over your life. The relationships you build from awareness will never resemble the ones built from survival. Healing does not begin with blaming the past, but with understanding it. For the undervalued sibling, reclaiming identity requires a conscious separation from the roles once adopted for survival. Called this process individuation, the movement toward becoming who you truly are, rather than who you were conditioned to be. It is not loud, dramatic, or immediate. It begins quietly with the decision to take your own inner life seriously. This often means confronting the shadow, the buried anger, the grief of not being chosen, the resentment toward those who were favored. These emotions are not signs of bitterness. They are signals of unfinished psychological work. When acknowledged, they release energy that was once trapped in self-doubt and compliance. Boundaries become possible, not as walls, but as acts of self-respect. The voice that once went silent begins to speak with clarity. Philosophically, Reckler. Aiming self-worth is not about becoming superior or proving anything. It is about returning to what was always there, an intrinsic value untouched by comparison or neglect. The past may explain your patterns, but it does not define your future. When you choose consciousness over conditioning, you end the inheritance of invisibility. And that single choice has the power to reshape not only your life, but every relationship that follows.